Yes.
It's called to order the Regional Planning Governing Board meeting for Thursday, April 13th, 2 o'clock, with a roll call.
All right. Ed Lawson,
Here.
Devin Reese, absent. Donald Abbott,
Here.
Jenny Breckus, Mike Clark,
Present.
Naomi Dewar,
Here.
Jean Herman, Kathleen Taylor,
Here.
and Diane Vanderwell,
Here.
and non-voting member Beth Smith. Here. All right. We have a quorum.
Okay, let's do salute to the flag. Beth, will you lead us? Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'm looking for an approval of the agenda.
Mr. Chair.
Got a
Second.
motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Looking for approval of the minutes from February 9th.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Public comment. Mr. Clerk, we have any public comment?
We have not received any. We do have, I believe, written correspondence for later.
Okay. All right, that brings on to business of the day, 6A. Discussion and possible direction to staff regarding the Regional Planning Commissioner's recommendations for modifications to the PRS guidelines found in Appendix 2 of the 2019 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan.
Thank you, Mr.
Jeremy,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it working?
you said you could figure it out.
I said I could figure out it. Can you guys hear me?
Nope.
Let's try this again. Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeremy Smith. For the record, I'm going to take us through a presentation talking about these proposed PRS changes. So, as you know, we have been going through for the past several months a comprehensive review of projects of regional significance and the guidelines that are in the RPC resolution. It is a concept that's created in state law, the project of regional significance concept. The law provides some pretty strict criteria for what constitutes a PRS, and also vests additional powers with the Regional Planning Commission to add guidelines that would qualify as a PRS. As I mentioned, the existing RPC resolution is included in Appendix 2 of the regional plan, and what we found through our research is that over the years, there's been a periodic comprehensive review of the PRS guidelines, and updates and edits to the guidelines have been accomplished several times. So what I'd like to do now is take you through the results of our comprehensive review and what we're suggesting would be those deletions and additions, basically edits to the resolution moving forward. First off, in the beginning of the resolution, there's a section, I call it the whereas section, where in that section, every time that the guidelines have been amended, they're listed in the section. Well, we've found that there were two missing in the existing resolution, and there had been edits that occurred in 1996 and 2000, so we want to make sure we add those back into the resolution so it accurately reflects what happened. So that's one change we're proposing. In addition to some small clerical errors like the numbering or lettering of sections, we also want to make sure that we're correcting references to statutes or other documents that are outdated. We want to update that stuff. And so one of the things that we noticed, we wanted to be clear that the Section 404 of the Clean Water Act are the wetlands that we're talking about when we're talking about the PRS guideline. Further, the Washoe County Health District Board of Health has changed their name to Northern Nevada Public Health, so we want to recognize that. So we're kind of future-proofing. They haven't actually fully rebranded yet, so we've added in the formerly known as Washoe County District Board of Health, and then maybe at a future date that might come out. But for now, it future-proofs us. And then finally, the word infectious and the definition of infectious waste has been removed from that health district scenario, and it's basically been replaced by biohazardous wastes. So we have updated this section and the definition section of the resolution to reflect that change. And that was in consultation with the health district. Okay, so another proposed change is in state law, as I mentioned, there's some strict criteria that are listed right in the state law. And then there are some lines that read that the RPC has the ability to add additional guidelines to the resolution. And so one of the things that currently is not listed in the resolution are these resources: historic, archaeological, cultural, or scenic resources. There is a guideline for paleontological resources. And so we spoke with the RPGB PRS review subcommittee about adding these in. There was some concern that this could potentially be a slippery slope, and the recommendation was maybe we don't do this. But when speaking with the RPC version of the subcommittee and then the RPC body in general, they felt it would be appropriate to add this in. And so I think what we found here is a bit of a compromise zone where now the guideline, as proposed here in blue, would mimic what is in state law, but it vests the power to identify these resources in the local master plans with the jurisdiction. So that's not us saying you shall do this on these resources, but more that if you want to use this method to indicate that a scenic or historic or cultural resource or archaeological resource in your jurisdiction is of regional significance, then the jurisdiction has the power to, designate that in the master plan. And then if there was some sort of significant degradation or loss of that resource being contemplated through some sort of case or development, then it would be triggering a PRS review. But the power still lives with the jurisdiction. So that was the compromise we got to on that one. And then finally, based on years' worth of research and study and conversation with the school district and others, we've come up with this additional new guideline, which addresses charter and private schools with an enrollment of 500 student capacity or greater to be deemed projects of regional significance if they are not included in the Washoe County School District's facilities plan. And you may remember that this was sort of option A, that we move forward and try to get this implemented in an attempt to fill some apparent gaps. So I'm going to go through kind of the rationale behind why we're trying to do this. We do have a PRS guideline in place already that indicates impacts to our schools should be accounted for as regionally significant, but we don't have the flip side necessarily that says impacts caused by schools should be vetted regionally as well. Now, in terms of Washoe County School District schools, we do have a robust facilities plan review process. So similar to what we would do with the regional transportation plan or the regional water management plan, if those plans are amended, they are brought to the Regional Planning Commission for a conformance review. Likewise, if the regional plan is amended and then there's filtered down effects to master plans and facilities plans, those would be updated and then also brought back to the RPC for conformance review. So there is no apparent gap in terms of regional review of the Washoe County School District through their facilities plan. However, no such regional review exists for charter and private schools. That's an area where we don't necessarily have a say. So the idea would be that add a guideline to the PRS resolution, which would fill that gap. And for the large charter and private schools that aren't in that facilities plan, that would give the public and or the RPC rather, a chance to review those for regional conformance. Now we have kindly asked staff from the local jurisdictions to be here to answer questions, but I thought I would take a shot at kind of describing the existing approval process for schools. And NRS dictated back in 2013 that the jurisdictions should work together with the school district to come up and standardize their approach to school approvals. And that work has happened, and there's very good alignment between the process to approve schools at all three local jurisdictions. Typically, that's done through something called a minor site plan review or administrative review process. There are certain triggers in there that can allow for the assessment of impacts and can actually allow for the possibility of conditioning offsite improvements based on the impacts of the schools. But typically, that process does not trigger a public hearing. And so there are some exceptions, like if there's a grading plan. But usually it's an admin process that's being vetted by the staff, and there isn't this public transparency piece like there is with the facilities plan review that we do for Washoe County School District facilities. So the idea here is to kind of also fill that gap in that public and transparency component. Okay, so in order to kind of figure out what the threshold might be, we engaged in a few analyses to figure out, can we figure out an appropriate threshold for charter and private schools that they would trigger a PRS review? We took a first stab at analyzing traffic data that's available from NDOT at the Trina website to evaluate hourly changes in traffic patterns. looking specifically at peak times during the week versus the weekend when school gets in and out. What we found is that generally this data is not really up to the task. It hasn't been collected for this reason, and so it's pretty washed out. The signal is usually not there. You can kind of see from that small map there, hopefully, that the pink dots are all the traffic locations, and then the school locations are either red dots or blue triangles. They're not necessarily always in close proximity to where this data exists. And so what we found was that we probably could get at something if we had a lot of time and money to do a targeted study, all of the schools that we're interested in, but that's really out of scope right now. So we tried to move on to try another analysis, which was basically a distance-based analysis, looking at proximity of schools to each other. In that one, we looked at a couple buffers, half-mile buffer. That pretty much almost got all the schools that were within a half mile of another school, about, I would say, 75%. Turns out 35% of the schools out there are within a quarter mile of each other. So it was interesting to learn, but what we also found is that just because they're close doesn't mean they're utilizing the same ingress and egress infrastructure, and that we could really tease out just from that distance analysis generally, right, what that meant. So we explored a couple things that didn't necessarily turn out to give us a very clear answer, but they were still informing nonetheless. And then we moved on to analyzing the concept of the frequency distribution of charter and private schools in the community. And so that's what this graph and map are showing. The graph on the left has bins at the bottom. Those are enrollment size bins. So first one's 0 to 99, second bar 100 to 199 students, and so on. The map at the right is a map of where these charter and private schools are located. And if you see green dots on the map, that really refers to the stuff that I've just put in the blue box here on the histogram. Those are the largest charter and private schools that are out there. And we found that there were only 4 charter and private schools out of 33 that had student enrollments that were greater than 500. And those are the Doral Academy. That one's located near Galena on Mount Rose Highway. Interestingly, this is probably the only traffic Trina site that did show a little bit of a signal where there was a maybe 150 to 200 trip increase around 2 to 3 in the afternoon on the weekdays compared to the weekends. So that one did kind of show something. And of course, it's the largest of the schools at 899. So that makes a little sense, and right next to Galena. Another is Pinecrest Academy out in Spanish Springs, Bishop Manogue High School down in the south end of town, and the Coral Middle School not far from the Washoe County Complex, just 579. And through our work and discussion with staff, discussion with this body, discussion with the RPC and others, these are the schools, honestly, that have come up time and time again that show these observed impacts, typically around peak hour traffic. So it makes sense that, that this is kind of a bit of a natural place to draw that division. And just to kind of reinforce this concept and looking at, how does Washoe County School District school distribution compare? We mapped out, where are those schools and also what are their sizes generally. And what we found was that the majority, almost 60% of the school district schools are actually smaller than 500. And it's kind of a bit of a natural break right there. And that the mode, or the highest number of Washoe County School District schools, actually exist in that 400 to 499 zone. So kind of further evidence that the 500 mark is, a pretty good place to place this threshold. So kind of after presenting that to the RPC's PRS Review Subcommittee and also the full body of the RPC, we got a little bit of feedback that we wanted to bring here and run by this body as well. First off, that it's important to designate a clear threshold so that we remove ambiguity, so that folks know what they're up against in terms of trying to put out a charter and private school, that we have a very clear threshold. We've suggested 500, and that's based on that analysis. There has been some feedback from one of the RPC commissioners that they thought that threshold was too low. We also, thanks to Adam Searcy, school district staff, heard that about the State Public Charter Authority. That's a body that we've now reached out to with the help from Adam, and we are going to coordinate with them in terms of trying to figure out, when is a great time to try to implement a PRS review of a charter school, and maybe maybe we start the process at the time they are granted their charter, so that we get right out in front. We always want to be as early as possible to head off the impacts that this process might cause, right, through the process. And then finally, any conformance review of a charter or private school that meets the PRS threshold would, of course, include an analysis against the regional plan, and that's going to look at impacts to regional infrastructure and also specifically going to target the impact of proximity to other schools, whether those schools exist or are planned to exist in the future. So that would be part of that review at the time that the threshold was triggered. Okay, so with that, just bring it back. Here's what it's suggesting. The project will require a change in zoning, a special use permit, an amendment to a master plan, tentative map, or other approval for the use of land, so any approval really, which if approved will allow for a new school within the TMSA with a planned student enrollment capacity of 500 or greater that is not identified in the Washoe County School District Facilities Plan. So it's kind of filling that gap again of regional review for those large schools. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. We have staff from the jurisdictions, we have staff from the school district, and what we're looking for is just any feedback you might have, an acknowledgement of this has been presented, and then kind of direction to bring this back to the RPC for final adoption. Thank you.
Beth?
Really hard. Okay, Jenny and I are sharing a microphone. So we really appreciate the work that was done and the conversations that have been had, and I'm pleased to say that on behalf of the Washoe County School District, we believe that this is a fair change, and we believe that this is good governance. On the school district side, it does require that we continue to do the work that we have committed to recently through the master plan that goes through the planning agencies and also the local governments. So we are committing to that. And this holds us accountable to that responsibility that we have been demonstrating recently. And it also addresses that we do have other educational sites within the community that are causing large impacts, as we just saw in today's presentation. And there should be a way equitably to bring attention to those school sites the same way that the school district sites are also scrutinized and approved. So we appreciate the process. We think that through this entire process, from the governing board subcommittee to the planning agency subcommittees, that we've landed in a really good place. And again, it really emphasizes accountability for all partners, good planning on the local government side, and the increased participation that all of our local governments and the planning agency has experienced from the school district will continue. So we support this.
Okay, Jenny?
Thank you. So, Dr. Smith, on page 20 of the packet, it says PRC guidelines, and then 1A sub 7 in green, it says student population K through 12 by not less than 325. That's the existing language of how PRS guidelines look at students, correct?
Yes, that would be the existing guideline, and since it's in green, it's one that was not in state law but was added by the RPC, and it's trying to recognizing impacts to schools by saying if a development would come in and create a student generation
okay.
condition. Yeah. So this is that
Yeah.
reverse condition.
I just, sometimes the beauty of regulation is consistency, and when you have two references to schools but different student ratios, it's, I think it's a little glaring. Will have an effect on the region of increasing student population by 325. So that would, what increases student population or residential units, I would propose, or suppose.
That's correct, yes.
I think you can make other arguments for other uses, but I won't go into that. So 325 students would be looking at, going back to, a multifamily that has 2.1 occupancy and, 20% of those are kids or something like that, right, is how you calculate. What is
Exactly.
the current calculation on that? Do you not even?
The school district might be able to speak to it. There are variable student generation rates depending on the neighborhood.
On
So-
it's the neighborhood, not the use?
Correct. It's the proposed use typically is going to be a residential use, and I think there are different student generation rates for
Okay.
different kinds of uses.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay, that's clarity. I guess the one thing that, I get the school district's opinion, but the charter schools, to me, you spent, I was kind of tracking it, most of your discussion was related to traffic and the impact. And I see a different feature, and that is the charter schools, when they co-locate in proximity to a public school, particularly a neighborhood one, which are, the elementary schools, they start to draw from that. So that's, to me, more of the impact is, are they draining from public infrastructure, which is an elementary school, a student population? And so, I think that concept is completely missed. And if we're just looking at it in traffic, might as well be looking at strip centers. I think that's where the PRS, the regional impacts, really need to be acknowledged. Is the presence of this charter school in this location going to be a drain on the infrastructure that's regionally supplied, which are these elementary schools? And that's where I think that concept didn't get in there deep enough.
Well, I think it's an excellent concept, and it's certainly something that if a PRS was triggered by the threshold, whatever threshold is decided, we would evaluate that exact thing. So we can add that to our evaluation process for a PRS for this guideline.
Anyone else? Yes, Naomi?
Yeah, thank you. I had the pleasure of serving and even chairing this subcommittee. And I'm really pleased with how this is rolling out. I think you've kind of done the dance as far as getting to the heart of what we were trying to get at. And I was feeling somewhat justified when I saw your numbers here. And the one that tipped me over was Doral Academy with its 800 to be proposed to be located in a very small neighborhood without a good road, without any kind of parking, and a theory that everybody works very efficiently and perfectly. And, I inward to my ward and I said, no, I didn't think. And then other members of the council got to go out there and also agreed. And we basically let them know that that was not a good siting for that kind of size of school. One of the biggest schools where the school district would put something like that on 10 or 15 acres, they were putting it on 5. Where the school district would have adequate parking and even grounds and space, they had none. And they just weren't bound by the same design considerations. So it further increased the impact because the pre-planning that the school district typically does was not done in those cases. Not to say anything bad about the schools or even that, in our society, charter schools are embraced and encouraged to occur, and they're specialized on certain things, right? That particular one is arts. There's others that specialize in other things, science or whatever. But anyway, I like the direction you're going, and I want to just make sure that I do understand. Could you turn us to the page that, not the page we were just on, but another page that would relate to schools? Or is that the only reference on page 20?
I believe that's the only reference currently in the resolution.
In the new resolution?
In the new resolution, we would look to add the piece we were just discussed, but
Yeah.
in the current resolution.
Right, this is the only place, but what I thought I saw here that you had a draft of the new resolution.
Yes, we do, and I'll
Oh.
go back to that. Why is it not working?
Page 35?
There we go. It's also on the screen.
Okay, great. That's where I was saying. Thank you. So I just wanted to make sure, if we look at this one more time, I like, first of all, that you're setting a threshold. I think it's a reasonable threshold. In other words, you've taken the very top size of schools and said, we got to look at those. In addition to the analysis that's generated by the number of students looking at the impact of schools. So anyway, I'll just stop there and say I really appreciate the work you've done. I also will speak to the issue of the slide before this one where you added the, or maybe the one before, where you added the criteria. Yeah, I support that as well. I mean, that's in state law. It wasn't really reflected appropriately, I think, in any of our documents review, and I think you've sort of walked a fine line to put it in the right spot. So.
Okay, anyone else?
One last thing. Reno has changed, I thought, the name of their approvals from a special use permit to a conditional use permit. It's probably captured later on. It says, or any approval of land, but did you have discussions with them about that?
Well, in previous versions of the resolution update, we added the kind of that language to make sure that it's clear that any approval of land
Okay,
is included.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Anything else? Well, then I'm looking for a motion.
Chair
What?
Lawson, may I just interrupt ask for public comment?
No.
I'll give you a good answer then. There is no public comment.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you guys do it different. Sparks, if you're not there at the beginning, you don't get to make public comment till the end. So just get it done. All right, we don't have any public comment? Okay.
Well, Mr.
now-
Chair, I'd be ready to make a motion then.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm grateful to make this motion. So I'd like to move forward with this item 6A and recommend, I think you have the motion up here, to direct staff to bring back the updated resolution to RPC for their final adoption.
Got a motion? Looking for a second? Got a second from Vanderwell. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, move on to 6B. Discussion and possible direction to staff on proposed legislation and legislative items for the 2023 legislative session.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this item, we're going to get a short presentation from our lobbyist, Tom Clark, who is joining via Zoom momentarily.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's scary, all right.
Good afternoon. Am I on?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Tom Clark. I am honored to be your lobbyist here in Carson City, and I'm glad I made it. I was in quite a, today is the day before the deadline day here at the legislature, so by midnight tomorrow night, if you want your bill to continue to survive this legislative process, it has to be out of committee. And so there is a lot of running around with amendments and a lot of work session hearings happening, and they do not follow the open meeting law. So bills pop up on agendas quickly, and we have to be prepared to speak to those bills if necessary. But I'm glad I got here. You'll see on the attachment that there are really 4 bills, technically 3 bills that we are tracking on your behalf. AB 213, SB 81, SB 169, and SB 247. SB 247 really only relates to Clark County, but we're keeping an eye on it just in case somebody decides that Washoe County should be included in that as well. And Jeremy, did you want me to just go through each bill or just open it up for questions on the particular pieces of legislation? I will tell you that AB 213 is the one that we are most actively working on. Mr. Smith has given us a number of points to debate. The bill will be on work session tomorrow afternoon. And so we are looking forward to seeing what amendments are published and if they're consistent with the comments and questions that we delivered to the bill sponsor on that. It's really hard to tell what amendments are actually going to be adopted. We have a good sense of what they are, but I won't make any promises until I actually see the first reprint of the legislation once the committee is done doing its work.
Mr. Chair, before Mr. Clark goes on, could you just go a little slower and tell us again the number of that bill and what that, I'm not following these set of bills. We haven't talked about them for several months because we only meet every 2 months. Could you just recap that one for us? This AB what?
Sure.
If I could just jump in quickly, it's on page 43, it looks like, of your packet is when Tom's report starts, if you
Yeah.
want to follow that, but go ahead, Tom,
Okay.
thanks.
So AB 213 does a number of different things as far as land use planning, and it also requires you to publish a lot of information on your website. It revises provisions relating to rural neighborhood preservation. I think some of those elements are going to change. Apologize. I won't go through the entire portions of the bill, but the comments that Mr. Smith has given me relate to page 11 of the bill. This is, I'm really sorry, Mr. Chairman, because a lot of these elements of the bill are already gone. And so I don't want to rehash a piece of legislation that is going to be
Right, just
completely
the
different
current form.
come tomorrow.
Current form, Tom. It's fine.
Thank you. So getting back to AB 213, it has to deal with the tentative maps, the deadlines relating to the land use planning that apply to counties and apply to cities requiring counties to do certain things. Mr. Smith, can I take just 5 minutes or 2 minutes?
Yeah, of course. And I can kind of maybe fill in some blanks while you're looking at that. I mean, when I read the bill, some of the things that concerned me were related to residential zoning and the identification of parcels. And so some of the work that we do here at the agency is we track dwelling unit approvals, we track dwelling unit potential, and we forecast future growth. And so some of what this bill was indicating in the new text was that ought to be delivered, I think, to the Housing Commission, the state level housing board. So theoretically, we could assist jurisdictions with that goal because we are doing that kind of work. Then the last part on page 11 of the bill, if you were to go and click on the bill, was something about kind of a speculative thing. It asked for a designation of parcels that within the next 5 years would support residential development, and asked for a list of parcels that would be good to change the zoning on, basically was how I read it. So that was just a little concerning because typically in our process, we steer clear of the speculative approach of what a parcel ought to become, and we focus on understanding what has been through the approval process. And so that was just something I noticed that seemed kind of counter to our approach, that I'm curious to find out what's driving that and do a little more conversation with Tom down at the legislature.
So in this, Jeremy, it says for affordable housing. What's affordable housing mean?
Well, that's correct. We typically take to mean that it's subsidized housing, and we're working
So-
with the housing authority to, the home consortium and the housing authority at the state level to help track that already.
So the state's trying to tell the local jurisdictions that we have to do subsidized housing, is the way you read this.
Well, I think it was that we would require jurisdictions to identify parcels that were, prime for that sort of development. But I need to probably dig further and talk to the folks that wrote the bill to understand fully what they're
I think we
intending.
need to figure out what affordable housing means. Because
Okay.
there's really only market and subsidized. All the rest are just names.
And thank you, Dr. Smith. I totally apologize for the intermission I had to take there for a second. Running down Carson Street was not fun. So now that I've
No
got
worries.
the breath, Mr. Smith is absolutely right. And Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right. This is one of probably a dozen bills that are addressing the affordable housing issue. And so I suspect that if this bill is successful when it comes out of work session tomorrow, it will become one of many bills that our stakeholder groups are going to be discussing. I would like Dr. Smith to come to Carson City, meet with the majority floor leader, Sandy Howdege, who brought this bill forward, so that we can have further conversations. A lot like last legislative session, a lot of these bills that we see, while they include populations over 100,000, they're really aimed at Clark County. And so we have been successful in the past of working with the bill sponsors to either take Washoe County out of the picture or to actually bring your expertise to the table to truly demonstrate what kind of an effect is happening. And I think 213 is one of those examples where a lot of this stuff, your organization is already doing it. And so they can learn from what it is that Dr. Smith and the Chuckie Meadows Regional Planning Agency are doing. And we can amend and clean up the bill as it progresses through the process. Shall I go on to Senate Bill 81?
Well, I think for me, the real rub on this is the state telling us the one power we do have to do is zoning ordinances, and they're taking that away from us. That does not bode well.
And it should not bode well. And, we have a very progressive legislature. And so they're taking aim at a lot of these land use issues and trying to control them from a state or from the state's perspective. And so best we can do is bring our arguments to the table that we need to maintain that level of control. We know what's happening in our neighborhoods. We know what's happening in our county. And if we can bring our expertise to the table to educate them, we definitely do that. But we definitely want to make sure that no mandate, especially an unfounded mandate, is imposed on the regional planning agency.
Did we come out with a position on this? 213?
Mr. Chairman, Tom Clark for the record. I would actually encourage us to hold off on taking a position until I see the reprint of the bill, because I think a lot of the elements that Mr. Smith has brought to the table will be addressed. If you do choose to take a position, one of the recommendations that I make for my government entities is to take a neutral position until we see the exact outcome of any amendment that comes forward.
Okay. Any other comments?
Well, just one
Ms.
follow-up.
Purkis?
Yeah, I mean, I do get the preemption on zoning, and I've always been steadfast on that. And that, in my view, is the beauty of the rent stabilization laws approach, because it gets to the worst players, the gougers, of which I've been deluged by concern from renter tenants in Ward 1 and the urban core area for years now. It peaks, it valleys, it peaks, it valleys. It's peaking right now, and just to let you know, the tenor of the peak is investor ownership, because a lot of people have swept in. Airbnb, Reno's laissez-faire approach to not regulating Airbnbs. So in a lot of these mature neighborhoods, people are chased out for Airbnbs that come in unregulated. And you know, I mean, the Trump tax cuts brought a lot of Californians in because they can't exempt their California state tax off their federal tax any longer. And so that, you know, it's always the California effect, but I think that really was accentuated by those tax cuts. So a lot of factors have put a lot of people in hurt, and that's the beauty of the legislature with those two stabilization bills. I think there's two parallel bills, 426, 317 is the Assembly one, that are moving forward. I don't know if Mr. Clark is testifying in behalf of those, or taking a position for us or for his other client, the Sparks Chamber, Reno Sparks Chamber, that I think is opposed to rent stabilization. But you know, I would encourage this body to take a position on that, and then zoning gets to be our thing. And we're still making affordability what it needs to be for those who are most vulnerable to gouging. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I was just
Ms. Stewart?
asking, I just wanted to clarify, I thought I understood AB 213 applied to Clark County, or is this also apply to us?
It applies to both.
Both? So the cutoff was for over 250 or over 500 or,
Yeah.
okay, thanks.
Okay, anyone else? All right, want to move on to the next one, Tom?
Senate Bill 81 was proposed by Senator Daley. It was quite an interesting hearing. And I want to make it very clear that I do not go to the table and publicly support, oppose, or go neutral on any of the legislation unless directed by you. So I have not done that for any of these pieces of legislation. However, at staff's direction, I will meet with the sponsors of the bills to discuss them. Senate Bill 81 was quite a hearing. I think every community that's affected by the bill showed up to discuss it, and it does affect Washoe County. Basically, what it does is it created a committee, and this was back in 2019. The committee was created of local governments within this region to get together and talk about projects of significance that were coming down the road and how they could put forward measures that would address those issues that they saw. The bill was heard on April 7th, passed out of committee. There is an amendment that watered it down even further as far as the authority that it has. It expanded the number of groups that this small committee of folks could work with, including the Regional Transportation Commission, your organization, and others. And it added 2 legislators to the seat. It was not a very popular bill, but it did get out of the committee with the amendments. And we will continue to track it and see how that first reprint comes out. And I will continue to keep you posted. It doesn't necessarily have any kind of effect on the TMRPA. It just is more of a one that we're tracking and keeping an eye on for you. Senate Bill 169 is also related to land use planning. This is a heat mitigation bill, one that will allow when I say will allow, it used to be a shall. You shall in your master plan develop heat mitigation type scenarios so that if you have a city park, a school, a large mall, those kinds of things that they would have to include in the master plan itself. Heat mitigation, that meant tree canopies, shade structures, water fountains, the things that are very, very important in Clark County, not necessarily here, but it's not a bad piece of legislation. And now that it's been amended so that it's permissive and that you may, it's not a shall. So if you choose to include those heat mitigation measures in your master plan ordinance, then you may include these. It's more of a, hey, you know, this is really important. People are dying of heat stroke out here. Let's make sure that they have proper heat mitigation amenities to be able to take care of the heat when they're out there. So with that, SB 247 is specific to Clark County, so I won't get into much detail on that particular piece of legislation.
Okay, any questions? Okay. There's no questions then. Thank you, Tom, for racing back.
You're welcome. Yeah. It's an interesting time. Come midnight tomorrow night, I would suspect that from 980 some odd bills will be down to about 650 some odd bills. The committees are doing their work and they are not pushing through a lot of the legislation that we've seen so far.
Okay. All right, thank you, sir. I don't think we need a vote on this.
Mr. Chair, I don't think we have to have one. No, I just would add that after this meeting, I'll continue to work with Tom Clark, and if needed, we'll bring together the RPGB legislative subcommittee to address whatever we learned down in Carson, and then in June, depending on that, or if needed sooner, we could bring an item back to this body if we want to provide some direction to staff on how to move forward. So we'll keep you in the loop on that.
Well, June will be over.
So it would have to be a
right.
special meeting if needed.
Yep.
I always encourage you to, if you have a question, if you see a piece of legislation that I can provide some insight, some information on, please work with Jeremy and he'll let me know what it is. And if it is something that we definitely need to take a position on, we'll take it to the legislative subcommittee or back to the committee as a whole.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right, let's move on to item 6.6C.
And just,
Presentation discussing possible direction of staff regarding natural resources plan, public infrastructure plan, and the 2024 regional plan update. Mr. Jeremy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it's going to be a trifecta of presenters for this item. We're excited to talk about our plans for the regional plan update, sort of kicking it off today. And I'm going to start us off to go through where we're at. So, talking about the 2024 regional plan update, state law requires that the regional plan be reviewed annually and updated not less than every 5 years. So basically that translates into every 5 years we have an update cycle. You know, every October we actually do review the regional plan. Sometimes we've brought back changes to be suggested fixes, but this is where every 5 years we address sort of the substantive nature of an update. These 5-year updates have been completed regularly since the first plan was adopted in '91. And as you mostly are aware, the current plan was adopted in October of 2019. So what were some of the changes that came through in 2012? And kind of going through this briefly just to kind of indicate that this really was a major overhaul of the plan document. It was a complete rewrite, actually. And some of the things that were accomplished is the document was slimmed down. We have quite a few less policies. It went from around 140 goals and policies to about 65 policies. And the point with this was to reduce redundancy with something that was already had the authority to do something. We didn't need to be overemphasizing that. That was part of it. And really focus on our special and limited jurisdiction as indicated in state law, and specifically NRS 278-0274, which describes the content of the regional plan. So we really embedded ourselves back in there. We also emphasized graphics and readability for the plan so that it could be approachable by a wide audience. The previous plan was a bit, I like to refer to as robotic. So this one's a little more human. And then also an emphasis on data and analytics. So one of the ways that we did that was we produced the 4 different scenarios of 20-year growth and investigated the differential outcomes of growing one way versus another. And we also beefed up the Truckee Meadows annual report to include a host of statistics that we're generating now every year, stuff like dwelling unit growth by jurisdiction or by tier, and employment information, master plan changing, that kind of thing. So we've definitely buffed up the data and analytics. There's been some major policy changes as well. So one thing that changed was pretty dramatic is that there was less emphasis on jurisdictional boundaries. Previous versions of the plan really kind of still fragmented the regional plan by jurisdiction. We still obviously recognize city limits, we recognize city spheres of influence, but we've made the TMSA more of a universal approach, non-jurisdictional, and based on criteria through the concept of what's on map 2 and on the screen here, the regional land designations or tiers. And so again, there's very clear criteria to be met to move from one tier to the next. And that's because we want to make sure that before we unlock the potential of a change to a master plan or a project of regional significance, that we're considering the impacts to our existing infrastructure and facilities and what we're planning for. And so kind of to build on that, we also added in a facility and service standards table, which is in policy PF1, the public facility section. And so for the 5 domains of water, potable water, wastewater, flood and stormwater, schools, and transportation, we now have this standards table that we're asking for any conformance case and for any PRS that jurisdictional staff or the applicants, give us the information about how is this currently servable? If not, are we planning to serve it? And if we're not planning to serve it, is it completely on the developer to build this infrastructure? Or if none of those things can be met, give us a feasibility analysis that targets things like how is this going to impact existing planning? What's it going to cost? Who's going to pay for it? What are the impacts going to be? So we find that to be, it's been a great addition that really gives us the ability to vet, these concepts at the time of the master plan change, because that's really when we make that change, when a body like this, RPC, decides to make that change, that's when the liability is initially incurred. So we want to make sure that we understand what that is. And because we come at the end of the process often, another change that we implemented was something we call the initial review memo. I don't know why this is the case, but prior to the 2019 plan, the agency was not commenting on development review memo requests from the jurisdictions. And then, surprise, at the end of the process, we had something to say. So now we've changed that, and for any case that will trigger a regional conformance review, we provide this initial review memo. It indicates the policies we think that will be triggered, any concerns we have that we'd like to see addressed through the local government process, so that we're getting our thoughts out there early on and hopefully not blindsiding folks, at the end of the process. So those are some major changes that we implemented. And again, the reason to kind of go back and refresh our memories on that is typical of the 5-year update process. We typically don't do a major overhaul every 5 years. We do substantive change, but we've created that new paradigm of the regional plan in 2019, and now we're looking to fill in and refine what we think is working and not working. One of the things we want to try to do is measure the actual observed growth and compare that with our scenario outcomes. How is our region growing compared to what the 4 different ways that we imagined it could grow, and how are we seeing those impacts? We want to track changes to the tiers and the TMSA. There's been about 100 acres of change to the tiering and TMSA that have occurred since 2019. So really not a huge amount of variability there. One of the things we really want to do is re-engage the Regional Plan Update Working Group. This is a group of planning staff from the jurisdictions and from the affected entities where we get together every 6 weeks or so, something like that, on the path to adoption to make sure we're vetting our policy ideas, understanding the concerns of the jurisdictions and entities, and making sure that the regional plan can address those in a way that is useful to the region. So that's something we're basically going to start after we hopefully get direction from you guys to kick this sucker off. And then finally, we're going to ramp up engagement around targeted policy additions and refinements that we've been working on. Public engagement, stakeholder engagement, engagement with the RPC, engagement with this body. We can have kind of a standing item. And then very specifically, we recognized early, or in the process rather, of updating the plan in 2019 that we were going to get a lot of good changes in there. We were going to have this major overhaul, but there's always room for improvement. And specifically, we recognized that we needed to target work around natural resources, and we also need to target work around public infrastructure. And so we actually created policies in each of those sections that called for, NR1, for instance, called for the creation of a natural resource plan, and policy PF3 called for the creation of a public infrastructure plan. So for the next part of this presentation, we're going to hear from Nate Kusha, who's going to talk about the natural resources plan, and Chris Tolley, who's going to bring us up to speed on efforts of the public infrastructure plan. So with that, take it away, Nate.
All right. Good afternoon, board members. Nate Kusha for the record. As Director Smith just mentioned, we have been working on our Natural Resources Plan, or NR Plan, as we call it in short. And this, as Director Smith mentioned again, was a kind of a targeted piece that we noticed in our last update that we were lacking some policies, or maybe wanted to beef up our policies around natural resources in our regional plan. So with that, over the last couple years now, we've been working towards this effort, and we've developed sort of a two-pronged approach to the NR plan. The first part of that being our data gathering effort, and the second part focusing on narratives and storytelling regarding natural resource topics of importance in our region. So for that first effort here, we have our data gathering effort, and we hired our consultant, Stantec. You guys approved that RFQ for that, and they have completed our data gathering phase. Through that, we obtained over 500 unique data layers from roughly 30 different organizations, and this data has been codified in a spreadsheet and formatted in order to populate a searchable natural resource data portal, which will be hosted on Team RPA's website, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. In addition to that, Team RPA has also identified possible data gaps in this data, and we're working to identify concrete data that may be useful for policy purposes. So simultaneous to that data gathering effort, we've been working towards the written portion of the NR plan itself. In order to organize the document, we created these 6 different category areas with underlying topics in each of those. You can see those listed up here. We have physical resources, biological resources, outdoor recreation, culture and ecology, development and open land interactions, and sustainability and resiliency. And we have 3 to 4 different topics within each of those categories. Once those categories were defined, we created a subcommittee for each of these categories, and we met with each of these subcommittees, and we really went through, they were created from experts in these topic areas, right? So for physical resources, we had a lot of the water folks involved with people from WRWC, One Truckee River, Tumwa, etc. And we really talked through each of these different topics. Underneath all of these, we talked about what they should be called, what we should be addressing, what are the challenges and the opportunities within each of these topics. We'll talk a little bit more about where that left in a minute, but then simultaneous to both of those efforts, we've of course been engaging the public throughout the process. So we created a variety of online content, including self-guided field trips, which take participants on tours of notable environmentally related subject sites throughout the Truckee Meadows. A Love Where You Live mini informational series. It's really highlighting natural resource related topics unique to our region, as well as general social media outreach. We have also hosted 2 large forum public engagement events that were both in 2022, one at Bartley Ranch Regional Park, which focused on the category and topic areas, and the second was held at Rancho San Rafael Regional Park and really centered around the plan process and content. Finally, we've also been attending a variety of other local outreach events to spread the word and share information about the NR plan. This included things like the farmers markets, the Banff Film Festival, which is held by the Nevada Public Land Trust. We did that last year. We're also going to that event again this year, and that's on Sunday. If anybody wants to come, check out the films and see our booth sharing the NR-related information. We also went to Tomo's Smart About Water Day, as well as many other things. Most notably, Team RPA did present at the 2021 Annual Conference of the Nevada chapter of the American Planning Association regarding the NR plan. Any of that online content is available on our website, so go ahead and check it out. You can go on the tours, check out the informational miniseries, etc. So, back to these narrative section, following those category subcommittee meetings, we have been working towards the actual NR Plan document, and we've been conducting further research into each of the different topic areas in service of creating a draft outline for each of these different topics. We are almost completed with those, and these outlines will be sent out to the category subcommittees for review and further refinement. Once those are refined, at that stage, we'll actually draft the written narratives themselves that will then be sent out to the general public for review. We'll get them back again, refine further, and hopefully at that point be able to draft the actual natural resource plan document, with those narratives serving as kind of the bulk piece of that document. And as mentioned, we have been creating a searchable data portal utilizing all of that natural resource data that we gathered. This will be kind of an invaluable tool for Team RPA, its partners, and the public, and having a centralized location to really access all this natural resource data. In addition to being the backbone for this portal, the data gathered during this process is being analyzed to inform the policy discussions that Jeremy was talking about, specifically on those natural resource topics for possible inclusion or refinement of existing policies within the regional plan. So here you can kind of see we have a screenshot of that data portal. It's still kind of in the testing phase, but we're almost completed with that and hopefully launching that soon. And then you guys will be able to go to our natural resource page of our website and search all of the data that we have available. We're able to search by category and topic, and you'll be able to search by data providing entity, etc. So it's pretty cool. Finally, as mentioned, all of these endeavors are really in service of informing policy discussions and providing policy implications ahead of that 2024 regional plan update. So information garnered from the data gathered, research into the outline natural resource topics, as well as public input, will provide a foundation for new or refined natural resource policies in the plan. And so far, we have identified really 5 possible policy additions or refinements to be included in the regional plan. Those you can see overhead here, and I'll just kind of touch on each of them briefly. So the first 2, Team RPA and our partner organizations have worked extensively on a source water protection program, as well as a regional trail network program. We've been working on those for the last few years at least, and those are with, again, a bunch of our partner organizations, and there's been a lot of robust information and data gathered through all of that, and programs have actually been implemented. So we're looking to support those programs and include policies in our plan that really point to those and say, hey, we should be doing these things. Moving on to that third one, we're calling a natural resource consideration areas, or NRCA currently. That name can change, obviously, but this is really born out of a requirement in NRS that we have a map showing the areas that are best suited for development based on the protection of air, land, water, and other natural resources, ambient air quality, natural recharge areas, floodplains, and wetlands. So while we do have policies that address all of those things currently, we don't have a map alone. So the NRCA concept is envisioned as a composite map of vetted and reliable natural resource data to be considered during the development review period. So that map, coupled with our development constraint or DCA area map, which is already part of the plan, is really going to serve as that required map from NRS. Finally, we have identified through conformance reviews and through our process over the last few years especially, that we really need to address the wildland-urban interface, or WUI, and tribal coordination at a regional level, and are really looking to include policies to that effect. So with that, that's the natural resource side of things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris Tolley to go ahead and talk about that public infrastructure plan.
And Mr. Chair, do you just want to wait for the whole presentation till we come back? Oh, okay. Well, just real quickly, this natural resource plan, obviously I've been pretty passionate about it. I think we started it when I was chair. The question I have is, are you planning as part, you're compiling all the data, but what are you planning to do? I don't know how to really phrase this, that would affect maybe something we do. So how will we interface with this plan?
Right. So few different ways, just as out of pure interest, we'll have that searchable data portal and anybody
Okay.
can access
Information.
that. You can look at the data. Right. And then again, we're hoping to utilize all of that information we gathered and a lot of those policy pieces that I just mentioned, if I can go back, things like the NRCA or the Wildland Urban Interface Policy, we're really looking to utilize a bunch of that data gathered. We have things like the fire risk assessment map. That'll be a big part of kind of creating what we're thinking, hopefully will be sort of a WUI boundary.
So let me just see if I can focus you. So the information that you get, are you hoping to share it with our staffs to incorporate into our staff's evaluation of, let's say, development projects or zoning decisions or?
So it'll be at a variety of levels, I think, but just using that WUI as an example again, I think what we're envisioning is that we'll create a layer composite of different information to create sort of a WUI boundary, maybe, right? This is one possible path forward. And then in that, we can create a policy that says maybe something to the effect of the local government master plans must utilize that layer in the evaluation of WUI.
Okay,
Something like
that makes some kind of sense. So this would be new information that we don't have today that could be incorporated in the decision-making back at our jurisdictions?
Correct, as well as at regional itself when we do a conformance review.
Okay. And then would we, you said policy consider implications, but would you be making recommendations? Like, so one is providing data and saying, you should consider this. Would you be making recommendations for us back at our jurisdictions about changing processes or policies that we have?
We're specifically looking at targeting policies in our regional plan.
Okay,
A lot
okay.
of our regional plan policies do, in essence, affect the master plan
I
still.
understand. Okay, well, thank you.
Can I just add one
Yeah.
thing on that, because I think it's a great line of questioning. The NRCA component, we really think is something that is going to be a contribution to the local jurisdictions, because it's going to be this composite map, which for any given case that we have a development review memo, we're going to provide that initial review memo that we talked about, and up front, we're going to be able to say, on natural resources, if you scored 20, and here's the layers you're interacting with, so that right away, jurisdictions know that these might be things that we're concerned about as part of the regional review,
I got
right
you.
up front.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
And of course, as we move through this process, all of these policies will be vetted at the various levels, and you guys will see whatever policies we come out with, you guys will get a chance to comment on that and give us feedback, of course.
Because just finally, like this natural resource consideration area, we have very little regulatory schema or data about, let's say, biology, right? We're supposed to get information from Natural Heritage Program to incorporate into our reviews at our cities and county. We're supposed to get now, Department of Wildlife is supposed to comment on the WUI interface and make recommendations for mitigation on biological, whether it's plant, animal. They're even, I think, changing their definition that they won't just deal with animals. Wildlife might change to wild. I don't know. But anyway, they're supposed to incorporate plants and insects and everything. So we don't do much with that, and we don't think much about it in our planning efforts. So I think this is an arena. Whereas we do have information, let's say on flooding, or we do have information on some other engineering considerations. So it's like a whole new arena that we haven't really considered. Okay, thanks.
Good afternoon, Governing Board, Chris Tolley, Team RPA. So over the next few slides, we will be going over the Public Infrastructure Plan component of the 2024 Regional Plan Update. And I'll start with a little refresh about the PIP-centric information we covered at the February 9th meeting as part of the RFQ item. So one of the primary outcomes of the 2019 Regional Plan Update was that planning staff, together with staff from the jurisdictions and entities, sought to continue increasing our regional understanding of public infrastructure. And that outcome was encapsulated in policy PF3. And then we're currently, in terms of the PIP, working on it in multiple ways, and staff has really been working on this kind of since the 2019 regional plan was adopted, and that was related to the TMAR. And we've continued to make small revisions to the TMAR process to incorporate the request for capital improvement as well as the public infrastructure data. And we are currently requesting, just in this last cycle, requesting the public infrastructure data as well as the capital improvement. And then finally, regarding the RFQ, we're in process of setting up interviews with the companies that submitted through that process and hope to have a selection process wrapped up in the next couple of weeks. And then, even though we've seen these before, at your February 9th meeting, we'll take a look at them again because we'll have these go forth to the RPC. So this is the draft goals for the public infrastructure. So again, as a reminder, it's draft goal number 1 was create a public infrastructure document that addresses the public facilities and services listed in Regional Plan Policy PF1 and described in NRS 2780274, subsections 4 and 5. And then Jeremy talked about the public infrastructure domains. Again, those are water, wastewater, flood control, stormwater drainage management, transportation, roads, and finally schools. Draft goal number 2 is coalesce and combine available data on existing and planned infrastructure provision, both spatial and non-spatial. And then finally, draft goal number 3, design and implement policy improvements to the 2019 regional plan through this process. So here are some of the key components that we are anticipating through the PIP process. First, through the combining and coalescing of public infrastructure data, we will be able to build a greater understanding of public infrastructure regionally and potentially refine the regional land designations. The map on the right-hand side of the screen is from the regional plan and depicts the proximity to public infrastructure throughout the region. This is the exact type of map or spatial representation that we imagine as part of this process that would be available to jurisdiction and entity staff as well as members of the public. And this representation is anticipated to be based on a more complete set of public infrastructure data, so that map would be refined through this process. And finally, regional planning staff believes that the information would ultimately assist in the regional, local, and entity decision-making processes. And finally, the implications for the 2024 regional plan update. First, policy refinements, potentially including, as noted, revisions to the regional land designations and standards table located in policy PF1, which Jeremy also referenced earlier. Second, process-related updates, which we also talked about, such as through the TMAR and the PIP annual data gathering processes. And then lastly, we envision that the PIP will improve the regional conformance review process overall by providing additional data for consideration both by us as well as the locals and the entities. Build a public infrastructure coalition and collaboration, so we'll all be working on this continually moving forward. And then build a greater understanding of the existing and planned public infrastructure throughout the region. That does it for my portion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris and Nate. I'll just wrap up with a couple last slides. So path forward that we're imagining is that today we're asking for your direction to formally kick off the 2024 regional plan update. That just sort of gives us, I think, a nice mandate from the board to reach out to the jurisdictions and affected entities and say, hey, we want you to do stuff. Come on over to Terminal Way and let's get cracking. So that would be, assembling the regional plan update working group, setting a meeting schedule. We're also planning to do, the Regional Planning Commission is really the technical body tasked with creating the regional plan. And so over the course of the next several meetings we're going to be having with the RPC, or just really all the way to adoption, we're hoping to add a workshop component as much as we can to get RPC feedback, directly involved. So if we have some policy ideas, maybe one day we talk about trails and source water, and we kind of lay out some drafts of what policies could look like, get some feedback. And of course, we'll workshop that out with this body and with the public and stakeholders as well. So we're going to ramp up public engagement. We're going to go through a little bit of a schedule here in a second. And then we're going to need to acknowledge and address emerging regional topics. One that popped into our brains was the recent public lands bill announcement. That draft came out. So, and other things that might come up that would influence this regional plan update process. So just kind of quickly, this was one of the attachments to your staff report. But, and you'll notice that the number of events are a lot denser in the near term, and it kind of gets a little sparser in the long term because we don't necessarily know exactly what we're going to do, next year this time. But we still have a path forward. So early on, we're really trying to engage with any local event that we can participate in, have a booth, get the word out, get people involved. some of the stuff Nate mentioned. We're hoping to host monthly something like a TMRPA Lunch and Learn or TMRPA After Work. Come hear us talk about what we're doing. Make sure that we have plenty of engagement opportunities for people to check in on this along the way. We're going in June to have an event, a community conversation, where we'll bring to light some of this natural resource work we've done with the community, have some charrettes, get some feedback. We're going to host that. We're also doing an APA and band event, Builders Association event, where we're going to talk about the public infrastructure plan with those folks, and R might come up too. So we have some pretty good things lined up in the next couple months. As we move forward, you can see every month there's some kind of TMRPA event happening. In September, we're planning to have what we're hoping is becoming an annual event. We had such a great time last September doing our natural resource event at Rancho San Rafael. Councilmember Reese kind of indicated, why don't you do this every year? And so we thought that would be a good idea to have an annual event for TMRPA to engage the public and give people an opportunity to come see what we were working on and provide feedback. So we'll be talking about all of these things at that event. There's another APA conference we plan to present. We're going to start in earnest the stakeholder engagement on the public infrastructure plan. We had the band event, but then we're also going to host a community conversation for that early in the fall. And then finally, at some point we will get the PIP draft released. I kind of need to go back because I failed to say that in July-ish timeframe, or even June, early summer, we hope to have that draft of the natural resource plan that Nate talked about. I always like to push it out a little further, Nate, because it takes us longer. September is when that's happening. Let's push it out even further. Okay, great. And then finally, moving towards October 24. October 2024 would be exactly 5 years since adoption, and we want to try to hit that mark. That's been our goal all along. And so this schedule and this kickoff is designed to get us there. With that, happy to hear any feedback, questions, comments, direction. The motion is pretty open-ended, but I would like to have your mandate to formally begin. Thank you.
Questions, comments?
And there's also no public comment.
It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move to direct staff to formally begin the 2024 regional plan update.
Okay, we've got a motion. I'm looking for a second. Got a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, thank you very much. We got your work cut out for you there. All right, let's go to reports. Washoe County School Board.
Thank you. I'd like to start with sharing the good news about Jaywood Raw Elementary School in South Reno. And that's going to be opening in August of this year. Everyone will be invited to that. But when Councilwoman Juror brought something up earlier today, I wanted to add something a little bit more about that school project. In partnership with the City of Reno, the Washoe County School District has invested in absolutely every traffic and safety improvement that we possibly could at our expense. Not just to be good partners, but to be good representatives in the community and to also recognize the feedback that our City of Reno representatives hear. And this is a really good example of the type of partnership that can, should, and will exist between the school district and the cities in representing the communities. So I did want to bring that up because that does tie into our conversation earlier. With Debbie Smith CTE Academy, so our Board of Trustees just approved a $28 million contract. So we're going to start seeing big improvements on that site over the course of this summer, and we're still targeting an opening date of August 2025 for that academy. I'm going to close with our facilities modernization plan, which has been a very big undertaking, and the school district would like to personally thank Director Smith and his staff. When you undertake a project that looks at all the schools, when you have over 100 schools in your portfolio, many of which, a majority of which are over 50 years old, built at a different time in this community. And we also look at some of the newer schools that we've been building where our population has been growing and wanting to bring equity to those learning environments. Director Smith and all the local governments that you represent have been integral in the mapping of this plan. The phase phase that we're in now is we're going into certain communities and we're starting to talk with them about different options that exist. Because when you do have so many schools that were built decades and decades ago, all of the options are on the table. That includes rebuilding schools, renovating schools, and then also the consolidation potentially of schools. But I do want to let everyone know that we've been working very closely with all of your government bodies. If anyone has any questions about this plan, we're more than happy to have staff sit down with you. And we feel it's been a really collaborative process. And now we're going back into the community to have more of these conversations. Nothing has been approved and nothing has formally come back to the Board of Trustees. That'll be later this year after we continue some additional community engagement. Thank you.
Okay, move on to director report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeremy Smith for the record. Just a very brief report. Just wanted to update that our consultant Stantec, we were able to sign extension of the task order for another additional $15,000. And that's our natural resource consultant that Nate was talking about. And the goal there really is to have them help us do some research about best practices for natural resource policy in similar regions and cities across the West, and also to provide some specific case studies to that end. So we can bring a white paper to bear on the discussions this summer around our natural resource plan. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any members have anything? Okay. Next regular scheduled meeting is June 8th. I will be in Ely at a Nevada League of Cities event, so we'll have to make sure that that Devin is here to run the meeting. Legal counsel, do you have anything, Jessica?
No, Jessica Prunty for the record. Nothing to report today.
Thank you. Any comments from the board, future agenda items? Okay, for me, I'd just like to see, Jeremy, we could just put together a path on how, if the lands bill does go through, what do we need to do to bring that land into conformance? So we all are on the same page. Now I'll ask for public comment.
Your favorite item. There is none.
Well, I mean, as an opponent of the lands bill, I think presupposing, the view of the chair in support of it, and saying the agency wants to support it, excludes a dialogue of those who might oppose it. So I think that's maybe a precursor to that position. If the agency wants to take it, we got to take it a hard up vote then, because I don't think the agency has taken a position in support of any legislation.
It has not.
Okay, I just want to get that
I'm just
clear.
looking for the steps
Okay.
to go forward.
Yeah,
Not
I
that
have
we're
no
approving
problem
it.
taking it to a hard vote and seeing who's
Yep.
for it and who's against it, and then having staff, advocate for it, but we got to take that vote, or, I don't mind having the clearing discussion of the procedures, because it's going on 3,000 miles away, but I've always been very clear that votes have to be taken on those bills, whatever agency is going to do it. Thank you.
And we were not going to take a position, but just to show the pathway.
And Mr. Chair, just on the same topic, since you brought it up, I was thinking about bringing it up, but I would love to have a presentation just on, we just got the bill. It's hard to digest what it all means. It's usually written fairly bureaucratic language as far as, it's hard to interpret. And I just thought it might be useful for us to have, a presentation of some type, because we've got all our jurisdictions here. If you think this is the right venue, it might be.
So let me, from my standpoint, because this is the first draft, and then there'll be another draft from the congressman, that maybe we should wait for both drafts to come out before we have that.
I didn't even know that there would be two drafts, so
Yeah, okay.
that's how lack of knowledge I have on it.
I mean, my thinking is for this agency.
Mr. Chair.
Oh,
This is not on our agenda.
Yeah.
I am hearing a
Yeah,
request for
yeah.
future agenda items,
That's what.
particularly after the
Yeah.
second draft comes out. And my recommendation is that we wait.
Well,
until
could you
then.
at least just tell us, is there a timing when it would be good to put this on the agenda? Like, we only meet every 2 months. So could you are you thinking that might be in August, perhaps?
From my standpoint,
Yeah.
August.
Okay.
Makes sense, based on the information I know.
Gotcha. All right, thanks.
How's that?
And I'd like to deploy the regional plan, the public infrastructure analysis, to the bill, not just a political decision. You know, let's use the plan and the adequacy of infrastructure to support development as the basis, because that's what this group does. You know, we're not here to take positions that may be partisan or political. We're here to really deploy, you know, the agency's mission, and let's do that on that, because you know, that's why we're doing the plan.
Fair enough. Okay, anyone else? Okay, now public comment. Still have none. Any written correspondence?
We received one point of written correspondence, which I submitted via email to you today, and always any written correspondence is available on the meetings page in the written correspondence zone.
That didn't make sense to me, but maybe I wasn't listening. Now we're to my favorite subject, adjourn.